there's been discussion here about what we see out of Israel with their level of innovation. Ambassador Cooper, you have referred to other initiatives around the globe. But in terms of what other countries are doing specifically to address a hemp or other EMP-related event, is anybody kind of leading the way here? Are there best practices that we might want to be looking to? Who's doing some good things?
The Israelis, the United Kingdom. I would go talk to those folks. We have international conferences every year.
To what extent do we cooperate with them then?
We meet with them. There's a big difference, though. Their government tends to control what's going on. Right. Whereas in this country, as I said to you earlier, we have a crazy quilt of electric power companies across the nation. Why I believe we have to work from the bottom up and island, that term we've used here, around our nuclear power plants, keep them safe, bring them back online. We get 20% of the nation's electricity from those plants. And so that's a valid resource if we lose the entire grid. Today, I don't have confidence that we can do that because we don't have these crazy quilt components connected. Mm-hmm. So we have a serious problem here, and we have been ignoring it collectively. I'm not trying to point fingers at anybody, but that's the reality.
Chairman?
Thank you for the question. We have memoranda of understanding with Israel, Norway, and some other countries, the UK, to work on these things. I would say in the solar storm area, Scandinavia is probably, the Scandinavian countries are doing the most. Obviously, their location would justify it. And,
well, the United States actually has a location.
Yes, that is correct.
Too. It's called Alaska.
My feelings exactly.
She noticed that.
That's why GMD has really been one of my biggest priorities, my feelings exactly. On the grid security defense orienting, I would agree with the ambassador that Israel, the entire Israeli grid is, it's just a different society in the way things are run. We have a much more open society in terms of how our infrastructure is designed and set up. I mean, and so I think in security, Israel is probably leading.
Let me leave you with one question, and again, I'm going to allow anybody to step in here. But Ambassador, you mentioned kind of this crazy patchwork that is out there. Some have mentioned the imperative of public-private partnership. But in order to have a public-private partnership, there's got to be a little bit of trust there. There's got to be a willingness to share some information. And in fairness, I think we've seen some instances where information gets out there and you get burned in the media. Probably the most current example is what happened in December in Vermont. As I understand it, Burlington noticed an alert about a suspicious IP address that had connected to one of their computers. They responded, reported. Next day, the Washington Post somehow learns about it. Then you've got reports about Russian hackers infiltrating. Later follow-up shows that the IP address wasn't necessarily linked to Russia. It wasn't necessarily malicious activity, but you really have eroded any trust that may have been about there. So how do we do a better job of this? How do we work to restore this level of trust and build a relationship that is going to be necessary in order to really address this? Mr. Wales?
Well, I think that we have a perfect example of that, of the relationship that the industry has built with the Electric Subsector Coordinating Council, the Department of Energy, and the Department of Homeland Security. There's no doubt that that was a significant issue and a learning experience for everyone. But I think one of the things that needs to also be taken away is that proves the effectiveness of getting that information out, because the information came out, said, here's some suspicious IPs that you need to look for, report to us right away, and that function worked. Now, was there a communication issue and a potential issue associated with that? Yes, and I think we're working on fixing that. Like we are lots of other issues between us. The relationship, I think, between the industry, actually within the industry and the federal government is stronger than it's ever been, recognizing we have a lot of common issues and we need each other's help in order to make the nation stronger. And I think we're doing a good job of that. We have a long ways to go. There are a lot of threats, a lot of issues, but there are just so many examples of how that working relationship has worked. And I think when we talk about that, one of the things we should even think about is 5 years ago, you did not have a lot of security clearances in the industry. And now, thanks to DOE and DHS, even a utility our size has 6 or 7 people that have security clearances. And we're able to do things we could never do before, and we're able to share information that we couldn't do before. So it's a learning experience. We all understand the communication challenges, and I think we're on the way to, at least for our sector, to do that. Now, we also are very interested in trying to build a stronger relationship with those other connected sectors that have issues, and trying to make sure that we actually look at cross-sector coordination, such that the other critical sectors, along with the electricity sector, actually can have that same functionality with the government.
Well, I'm encouraged to hear you say that you think things are getting better in terms of providing that level of security clearance, because we had a hearing not more than 6 weeks ago where that issue was raised about the frustration with how long it actually took. And it was actually a former member who he was former head of the Intelligence Committee on the House side, and was still having trouble getting his
I don't know
clearance.
what the current process is, but the number of people from years ago that we got through that process was much higher than it's ever been.
Ms. Durkovich?
Yes, an excellent question. And while the incident that you referred to is unfortunate, I would say overall the trust that has been established between government and industry in the partnership is stronger than it's ever been. Kevin alluded to many of the activities that we have underway. In my former position, I actually ran the private sector clearance program, which is the program that provides clearances to infrastructure owners and operators who have the need to know. And when I left, I think there were roughly about 3,000 owners and operators that had clearances. Clearly, what happened at OPM has slowed the ability for us to provide those clearances in a timely manner, but I think that those timelines are clearing up, and those clearances, as well as many other authorities that Congress granted DHS, and that's everything from the Protected Critical Infrastructure Information Program to the Critical Infrastructure Partnership Advisory Committee, which allows us to both share information, to ask for vulnerability information from owners and operators, to protect it from regulatory purposes, from state sunshine laws, from FOIA, so we can take that information, so we can investigate, we can do forensics, we can anonymize, and we can push it out to industry is one key part of how we share information. As part of the Electric Sector Coordinating Council and all of the other sector coordinating councils, we bring industry in on a regular basis to provide them with threat briefings, with classified briefings to help them understand this complex risk environment. We can have conversations that are not available to the public about what we should be doing to protect our infrastructure, and the list really goes on. But I think there's two important points that I want to end with. Is one, better understanding the intersection of these critical lifelines and the vulnerabilities caused by them, and how we can continue to ensure and have plans in place to mitigate cascading impacts in the event of some of the incidents that we've been talking about. And then I think the second piece of this is, as we begin to modernize our infrastructure and we begin to move to smart cities, I cannot underscore the importance of baking security in at the beginning. You need the security people sitting next to the coders, the architects, and the builders. It is imperative. Security is the new normal. It will be a differentiator. It will be a differentiator for companies. It will be a differentiator for utilities. It will be a differentiator for cities. And it has to be one of the core principles as we go about modernizing our infrastructure. So thank you.
Good. Ambassador Cooper, why don't you wrap up, please?
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to comment on this last discussion about security. I think someone needs to do a serious look at the levels of security that is inhibiting this kind of open discussion of what the environments are that the industry has to design against, as well as some other factors. I don't believe that there is an absence of technology to deal with the EMP issue in an affordable way. And I want, for your peripheral vision, to just make one more point. I absolutely agree with you about the need for trust between the people and the parties that have to deal with this issue, which is why I gave up on trying to get institutions here in Washington and even in the states to deal with this issue. Lots of folks have tried, are trying, are frustrated by the issues that you mentioned. And that's why I'm working very closely at an individual level with key people, and when I say local, I mean in 3 counties right now, and we're going to couple into the NERC exercise this November, the GridX exercise as well, to expand our lessons learned outward in South and North Carolina, and we'll go elsewhere. I think that we have to wake up to the sense of priority in dealing with the issues. The EMP Commission has looked at the briefings that some of the folks at this table have given. It is their assessment that they're underestimating the threat even for the solar threat. The magnitude of the E3 component for a nuclear device is larger than for the solar device, solar event. So if we harden the grid for a solar threat, we will still leave ourselves vulnerable for the other. And in addition, you have E1 as a component that threatens the solid-state electronics throughout our grid, and that includes the distribution systems for petroleum and natural gas. So we need to deal with this issue in a very, I believe, direct way. I think that we have hope that what we're going to accomplish locally, and when I say island, I want to build an island around Duke's nuclear plant, its hydroelectric plant, and a coal plant, all on that lake, so that the local people are engaged in working the problem. And by the local people, I mean the mayor, the city council at the political level, but Joe Sixpack, who understands what we're doing through the National Guard and so on. Our adjutant general is an electrical engineer graduate of Georgia Tech. He understands these issues, and he is committed to try to work with us, and we'll expand outward from there to other states and other locations. I believe that's the way we have to go to really build trust among the key players that are required to cut across this quilt patchwork that I tried to describe or illustrate earlier. And that's not to argue against initiatives at the state level or the federal level or so on. At least that raises consciousness about the nature of this threat. But my concern is the devil is in the details. And we learned hard lessons in the Department of Defense that it's not just having the right design, it's not just having the right deployment, and it's not even just having an operational concept that's important. If you don't test it, I don't believe it. And we learn through hard experience that maintenance and that sort of operations of operational systems that were well designed and deployed, we create holes by which EMP can get through. So this is a hard problem. I think we have to choose where we work carefully and protect what we need to work to assure the viability of the grid and for the American people.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I think the testimony this morning, the questions and responses back and forth have been very helpful. I think this has been a great discussion. I appreciate some of the suggestions that we have, but I also appreciate the urging that we really not let our guard down, recognizing that this is complicated, multifaceted, and it requires an attention to it that is really daunting. But just because it is daunting does not mean that we should not be working with you, with our agencies, with the sector, really across country. I appreciate what you have said, Ambassador Cooper, about really starting out very local and understanding the implications, not just those that are tasked with it on the day-to-day, but helping to educate Americans about our vulnerability and what we can do to reduce that. It's always important here in Congress that we be reminded of the urgency and the imperative of our task, and I think we were given that message this morning. So I thank you all for your contributions, and with that, the committee stands adjourned.